Well, this is probably going to be the last one, except if it becomes so terribly long that I can't stand anymore, then we'll just have to hang on and do it next time. All right, last time we left off right when the quest was beginning, when Gawain made his proclamation that he wouldn't return for a year and a day. So the next day the quest began, and 150 knights left the Round Table. And there was great sadness, not only the sadness of Arthur for losing his knighthood, understanding that many wouldn't come along, but the sadness was general, because what happened was many knights intended to take their ladies and camp followers with them. And at the last minute, word comes from the old man that led Galahad into the hall. His name is Nacien the Hermit. And Nacien takes over most of the things that happen in the Grail because the spiritual leaders, it seems that many knights, when they were finished being knights, they became hermits. And it's like the direction of all of the Knights of the Round Table came from the priesthood. So he said one of the conditions of the quest of the Grail is that no women are allowed and you must be chaste during the quest. So undoubtedly there was a lot of sadness. And so what happens is that morning 150 knights hear the mass, and they and their squires mount and they drive out or ride out, and the first day they come to the city of Vagon, and they all stay over in that city. And then the next morning they disperse, because another one of the conditions, or one of the general states of the Grail quest, that isn't really stated as a condition, is that every knight must travel alone. It has to do with the quality of individuation, that one cannot attain to divinity collectively, because it is union with the divine from within, and those from without are only a distraction. So they set out for the attainment. Now what happens is that each of the knights has different adventures, and the way the Mallory story goes anyway is the adventures are given in concurrent developments, but focus on about 5 different people. Tells a little bit about this one, and then drops and then picks up what the other one was doing at the same time. So it's centered around around the 5 or the most principal knights of the Round Table. And what happens is the story picks up first with Galahad, and he comes to the court of King Bagdemagus, and he comes into one of those themes that is common throughout the Grail. King Bagdemagus is also a wounded king, and he was wounded also for the trespass of the sacred sword. And he comes to his castle. Galahad comes to the king's castle, and there is a shield hanging there, and this shield is probably one of the strongest symbol of the Grail that still exists. This is in verse, it is the shield of the Red Cross. It's a completely white shield, and it has a one red cross on it, and it has quite an interesting story. It has to do with the story of how Joseph of Arimathea, who this story claims or hints at is the natural father of Jesus, and he comes when he has the spear of Longinus and the Grail cup that has caught the blood of Christ Jesus, and he brings those implements and other relics he brings into Europe. Along the way, he meets a king called King Evelake, and Evelake is fighting with the Saracens, and he fights against a king called King Ptolemy. And he has this shield made. And Joseph of Arimathea, when he sees the shield, somewhere along the line, Joseph of Arimathea had high blood pressure. And he starts bleeding out of his nose, and he takes the white shield, which already had an embossment or the figure of a cross on it, and he reddens it with his own blood coming out of his head, and the shield is entrusted to Nacian. Now this is interesting because this means that Nacian has an age of at least 300 years of age. Joseph of Arimathea had, I think, an age of around 370 or 350 years, which would coincide with the idea that if he was the natural father of Jesus, he would have to have been an adept and capable of living that long. But at any rate, this shield is used and then is made sacred by the blood of Joseph, and it is then set aside until only the most pure and strong knight that ever was and ever will be can wear it. Anybody else who wears it is in great peril. So what happens here, the shield in heraldry, because this gets into a really interesting study of symbology, one which Shakespeare knew extremely well, because you could tell the story of an individual and his aspirations and his history and the whole nature of his family by looking at the heralds that they had on their shields and that they later on had as coats of arms that they hung over their doors. This is something that goes way back into Greek times when they had the Triskion shields, and individuals defined themselves and their nature through the shield that they wore. The shield, in a sense, represents the vital body, because it is the only protection that the aspirant has. All of the notions about psychic self-defense are actually baloney, because it's very selfish to think enormously much about protecting yourself or saving your own skin. That leads to a negative kind of thinking. And it is only the individual who loves and who acts on that love and emanates a very thick, rich, vital body that becomes invulnerable to attack. Because the positive attitude that is necessary to emanate love like that makes one impregnable to attack by black magic or anything from the adversary. The idea of the blood cross on the white shield hints at the whole notion of occultism, because the aura of the occultist is not perfectly white. It has a pinkish tint to it because of the extreme self-consciousness, the ego, or the third member of the Trinity within the self. The third part of our threefold spirit has always been indicated by the color red, and that works into the aura as having the rosy kind of aura. And at any rate, all knights at some time or another are allowed to see this shield, the shield that Galahad eventually wears, and just seeing the shield itself is a great inspiration, and it uplifts their whole life, which leads to another tradition that is in the West, and the claim is that in the West that every Christian mystical aspirant at some time or another gets to see the vital body of Jesus. And the vital body of Jesus is supposedly the most highly developed vital body of any human being. And it was the vital body used by the Christ when in the body of Jesus, and is now preserved in a glass crypt because etheric vision or magical agencies using the ethers cannot penetrate glass, because it's really how would you say, a supercooled liquid. And the ethers need the crystalline quality to be effective, and so they can't penetrate glass. And so it's very likely that the shield that Joseph of Arimathea brought into Europe was probably another of the relics, and may very well have been the vital body of Jesus, this is the kind of work that adepts do, because only they can be trusted with that kind of activity. Galahad at this temple goes down into a tomb and draws out a skeleton that is a skeleton of a sorcerer, and not at all a Christian, and says, "You don't have a right to be buried here," which I don't know anything which it means. We're going to skip a lot of the story because there's so much that we could go in. But at any rate, he meets a young man called Mylius of Denmark. And he's the son of the king of Denmark. And he knights Mylius. And they are riding along. And they come to a place where there is a cross at the division of the ways in the road. And it says, don't take the left path unless you want trouble and sorrow and woe. Take the holy path to the right. And Mylius says, well, you go to the right and I'll accept the challenge of the path to the left. And he goes and he gets battered almost to death. I forget what his adventure was, but I think he gets clobbered by some knight that has magical properties or something like that. And Galahad, who has taken the right path, eventually ventures into the same area that Mylius is in, and he saves his life and takes him to a little hermitage to be healed, and he leads a much different life. And then it is revealed to him by the hermit at the hermitage that the left hand is the path of selfishness, and it is the path of the adversary, and represents the path of evil. And I think these sorts of things, in the ancient astrology, this was always called the dividing of the ways, and the symbol of Aries then represented choosing the right or the left-hand path, and some people go so far as to say that as many choose the left as choose the right, but there is a great warning, because more people enter the path of darkness and the path of evil, not from lives of small indulgences, but in being spiritual students who push it and selfishly try to force their way into heaven too early, and all that they have developed to bring themselves to that high state is then turned into darkness. Then comes something that is a recurrent theme during the Grail. Galahad is riding along, and a voice tells him, gives him a command to go to this castle. And this castle is a castle where a lady is kept, and there are 7 knights who are very, very wicked, and they overthrow and kill anybody who comes to this castle. And Galahad is commanded to come to the castle, and when he comes there to the grounds before them, the 7 knights challenge him, and he does battle with all 7 knights, and he conquers them all completely, but he doesn't kill them. And he frees the lady, and she's free to go after that. Shortly after that, some other Knights of the Grail come along, and they are Gawain and his brother Gareth and Ewain. They come to the same castle or thereabouts, and they meet the same 7 knights, and they decimate them and they kill them completely. They go to a hermitage that is nearby, and the hermit at the hermitage tells Gawain, "You are a wicked knight." And he says, "I want you to do a penance." And he refuses to do a penance. He says, "We Knights of the Round Table are sleeping out all of the time, and we've got a rough life of it trying to make the world a better place. I don't need any more penance." And virtually he has a few more adventures, but not very much. It virtually ends the whole quest for Gawain. Now, it is a central idea throughout all religions. It's in the symbology of all religions that there are 7 principles of being. That is to say, one divides itself into 2, and the 1 remains in the 2 to become the 3, and the 3 reflects itself through its common center, and it becomes 7. And this becomes the number of manifest creation. This is something I normally take about 2 hours to go through, but I'm going to whip through it in 1 sentence because I think everybody's familiar with it. That 7 is a number of manifest totality. That the 7 colors of the rainbow spectrum represent the simple breaking of light into its principal ingredients in the manifest world. And that 7 principles then represent all of the characteristics of a human, beginning with the divine spirit and ending in the physical body. But as we've said very often, as above, so below, that the 7 principles are found microcosmically within each of the vehicles of a human and within subsystems and almost ad infinitum. And so it turns out that, for example, in the desire body there are 7 vortices. And each of these vortices relates to one of the spectral colors, to one of the planets that most represents the quality or the principle of that center or of that focus of being. And each of those principles represents a creative talent or a creative ability. But each of those desires can be perverted in its own way. And when it is, they become something that has also been traditionally known for century after century after century, that though there is one basic sin, the sin of the original fall of humanity, and that is the sin of selfishness, where we took the creative energy into our hands selfishly because we wanted to be in control and we wanted to have our own destiny in our own hands. That original sin manifests then through each of the 7 principles, especially as found in the desire nature. And these then become the 7 deadly sins, greed and lust and such like that. And when you're talking about a castle, this is all very much a coded sort of thing. I think every time that I've read the Grail story, I've gotten enormously much more than every other time. And I think I could read it probably 10 or 20 times more and still get more out of it. But the castle is a keep, like our bodies collectively. Our somatic existence represents a castle. And the knights that keep prisoner the lady within, that is the bride from heaven within, represent the 7 deadly sins. But the difference between Galahad and Gawain is that Galahad overthrows them, but does not kill them. Because if you kill out the principle, you have cut off your ability to manifest part of your existence for the good. You cannot then creatively use it. You cannot be a positive force in evolution, and in a way you have defiled God's castle. You have defiled it by making it impossible to use it as it was intended. So the real desire of every knight that is seeking the Grail is to heal each of these centers, to overthrow its rulership by the adversary, and instead to use it as a positive force that we can use in creativity. So all that is being indicated here, especially that later on we're going to hear that the hermits outright tell Gawain that he's a murderer. And there's no way that we can possibly live in the positive side of life that takes us out of a life of sin, except that we become non-destructive, but instead that we be creative and that we be builders. About this time, Lancelot and Percival are traveling together, and they come through the woods, and there's some kind of a tournament going on, and they get into it, and they start jousting with other knights, and Galahad comes onto the scene, and he enters the tournament, and he just throws everybody over, including Percival and Galahad. And they know immediately who it must have been, but by the time they get onto their horses and chase after, Galahad has disappeared. In fact, we'll pick up Lancelot and Percival at a much later time, about 6 hours from now. Lancelot at this point does travel to a chapel, and at this chapel, it's most curious. He looks in, and it's a very beautiful little chapel, but he goes around the whole chapel, and there's no way you can get in, and he's locked out, which we're going to find out to be as a common theme to him. But he lays down next to it, and he dreams of an old man, and he sees himself as an old man in holy clothes. He gets up, and when he wakes in the morning, and he goes on, and he finds that somebody has stolen his horse and his shield. In short, he's lost his vehicles, his soul body, and so to speak. And he comes upon a hermit, and the hermit asks him to confess. And this is another one of the common themes of the Grail. All of the knights must confess. And the more deeply heartfelt their confession is, and the more total it is, the more success that they have. And he actually does confess about his sin with Guinevere, and he makes a promise to the to the hermit that he will not return to his old ways. In the meanwhile, Percival, after he has been thrown over, he thinks it's Galahad, and he travels to an abbey that is nearby, all over the place. England must have just been covered with abbeys and hermitages and chapels and places like that. And when he gets to the abbey, he tries to learn about the Knight of the White Shield. And when he gets there, the abbess, or the abbot, I guess abbot is the same for male or female, turns out to be his aunt. And she tells him of the death of his mother. Remember, his mother tried to keep him innocent from knighthood because both his father and brothers had all died either in warfare or in tournaments, and she tried to raise him as an innocent. And when he decided to become a knight, she just died in sorrow for him, as if to say, the feminine within us that works on personal self-protection. That is to say, when we need to be taken care of in an almost instinctual way, in a natural way. In this sense, you might say his mother represents nature. When he becomes a knight, and especially when he becomes a knight of the Grail, he dies to the whole idea of nature. She tells him the story of Merlin's Round Table, and she tells him that the Round Table represents the earth, and it isn't just merely the table that they have their bread at, that as well as being the circle of pole stars, round of which the North Pole is one, that the round table is also the earth, which is a very common theme, that the earth was considered the entire orbit of the earth around the sun. It was considered as the earth itself was the entire orbit. It's very common in a lot of mythology. And she tells him the story of the three bulls that we've talked about before, the three white bulls and the one that has the black spot on it. And after having inspired him in his duty to uplift the earth, especially through the seeking of the Grail, which we recognize as a kind of spiritual union, she tells him he must go to Castle Carbonek, and Castle Carbonek is the Grail Castle. He journeys to a monastery where he meets King Evelake. And King Evelake was the one who had originally had the white shield crafted, and he is wounded, and he is blinded, and he's never left to die until the night of the 9th degree comes, which gives us another possible insight into the idea that Galahad was the 9th generation from Jesus, 8th and 9th generation of Jesus on both sides of his parentage. It is potentially represents then the Galahad representing the beginning of the path of initiation, Christ representing the end. The different generations can very well represent degrees of initiation, and that by passing through the 9 degrees of initiation, he comes to be with the Christ. It turns out that King Evelake is also very, very long suffering. He is 300 years old, most of which time he has been wounded and blind. And at this point, Percival has an adventure where he comes across 20 knights, and several of them are carrying a bier. This is another common theme in the Grail, either wounded or dead men being carried on biers. And in one way, the pole of the stars was sometimes called Arthur's Wain, which is the old way of saying Arthur's wagon, because the Big Dipper was seen then as the wagon with Arcturus pulling it, whereas the pole of the North Stars then was the wagon wheel. There were two biers. One was called, the large bier was at another time called the bier of Lazarus, the brother-in-law of Jesus, according to this tale. It gets pretty wild and woolly. And one was called the bier of Jesus. I believe the smaller bier, or carrying the corpse of Jesus, was the little bear. It's a very, very interesting story, which we don't have time to go into. And what happens here is the 7 knights out of the 20 come and battle Percival. Only, unlike the 7 that Galahad fought with, these 7 attack all at the same time. And Percival is about to be completely overpowered by all 7 when Galahad comes charging out of the woods and gives him an assist, and eventually the 7 are defeated. Now, this is again a parallel that all of the knights who accomplished the Grail or came close to accomplishing the Grail all had the same thing happen, where they had to fight 7 knights. In the case of Percival, he fights all 7 simultaneously, and we recognize that Percival represents the life spirit in the Trinity, whereas Galahad represents the divine and Bors the human spirit. We've talked about that in the past. And it is the nature of the life spirit and the intuition that comes from the life spirit that it does everything at once, simultaneously. And it doesn't delineate, for example, as the human spirit does, the human spirit being associated with the mind, delineates things and does things in succession. So Percival has these things all happen at once. And we also know that the life spirit, which is the vehicle of the Christ, has a different way of doing things. It wins by losing. And this is precisely the way Percival wins. He wins by losing, and when he does so, there is that common connection between the divine spirit and the life spirit, where you don't know whether the imagination of the life spirit is drawing the divine spirit out, or whether the divine spirit is commanding the life spirit to take form, and that the two work very hand in glove with each other and in a creative way. And so then Percival overcomes the 7, winning by losing. Galahad dashes off, and what happens is his horse has been lost in this battle, and he can't borrow a horse. And the only way he could get a horse would be to overpower somebody else and steal theirs. And that doesn't work for him. And then somebody comes along with a hackney, an old beat-up old horse, and he says, oh no, I'm back to these again. And he tries that for a while, but loses it. And then along comes a woman with a magnificent, magnificent black horse. It's inky black is the way it's described. And it gets pretty wild. And this represents the nature, like, if you lose your vehicle, or if, by some means you are parted from your own consciousness, you cannot actually steal the consciousness of another, and this is the position that Percival is left in. He accepts the horse that the lady gives to him, And what happens to him is that the horse is enchanted. And it takes him on a ride that he'll never forget. It takes him on what is normally a 4 days ride, and it does it in 1 hour. And it runs, and it's about to take him and run him right into the ocean, which is burning with flames at this point. And he makes the sign of the cross, and as he makes the sign of the cross, he's thrown off of the horse, and the horse burns up in the sea, and he's left on the shore. Clearly what's happening here is immediately after he gains some control over his inner vehicles by the defeat of the seven, he has a wild soul trip. And in his extreme desire to unite with Galahad, or to be where Galahad is, he's taken to the spot where he eventually does meet Galahad. And that's exactly the way that soul flights work. Extremely rapid according to the degree of concentration and intensity of desire that you have. To the degree that you can focus accurately and put everything you've got in it, to that degree you are where you want to be. And he ends up that way, but there still is too much wishing on his part, and so he has all of these temptations. Whoever wishes for something is actually creating forms for himself, and those forms become temptations rather than accepting what life presents. He has these temptations come to him. And while he is walking around on the seashore, he sees a lion that is battling with a serpent. And the lion is young and the serpent is very old. And he helps out the lion by clobbering the serpent, and then he falls asleep. And when he's asleep, he has, obviously these are symbols of Lucifer and Christ, because quite a bit of these stories are taken exactly out of the Bible, and the symbol of Lucifer has always been the symbol of the serpent, and the symbol of Christ has been the lion's whelp out of the tribe of Judah. Also other things, the lamb has been associated with Christ, but at any rate, he falls asleep, and he has a vision of an old woman riding on a serpent and a young lion. And he is told he must fight the greatest champion or have universal shame forever. The older lady rebukes him and says, "Be my man." He says no, and he's taken onto her ship. And that's where she tells him, she propositions him and says, "Be my man." And he says no. And also in the vision, he meets a very, very old man who represents aged experience, or this is when he comes out of his dream. And the old man tells him that his dream means that there are two laws, and that the old lady riding the serpent represents the old law, and that is a law of violence, that is a law of self-gratification, that is a law of selfishness. Whereas the young lady riding the lion represents the new law, and he represents the law that is vigorous and fresh, and that represents the law of the heart. And when he wakes up, the lion is with him, and he leaps off the ship at the command of the ancient, and he goes back to the shore. Another ship comes up at this time. This gets very, very complicated. There's so much detail in here. I'm trying to zip through this as much as can be. And a damsel is on this other ship, and she says she's seen the Red Knight, because at this point, in fact, all the knights that have anything to do with coming close to the Grail wear red for quite a bit of their while. And she says she has seen the knight wearing red, and she will escort him hence to where he drowned. She says he's drowned, he's dead, which is a lie. And she says the old man is a fraud. Don't listen to him, but help me. She says, I have lost my inheritance, and I need a champion. And Percival agrees to be her champion. And she sets up a pavilion for the two of them on her ship, and she starts feeding him, and she starts feeding him all kinds of meats and wine, both of which are unallowed on the quest of the Grail. Flesh, food, and wine are not allowed. And he makes the mistake and starts eating, and this is a very strong temptation for him, because otherwise he's never bothered by temptations. And you might say this is almost a throwback to the old mysteries, because Percival claims this is the strongest wine he's ever tasted in his life, and that when he tastes it, he's immediately put into another state. And this is very often the way, in the pre-Christian mysteries, the way candidates for initiation were tested, because they didn't know how they would act when they got into the desire world. They couldn't guess, so what they would do is they would get them drunk. And when they were drunk, they would give them all kinds of trials and temptations. And if they could acquit themselves well when they were very drunk, the chances were pretty good that if they were taken out of the body and into the desire world, that they wouldn't get carried away by all of the powers that are in the desire world. But at any rate, as soon as he's drunk more than he should have, she unclothes herself and hops into bed and invites Percival to come into bed with her, which is, nobody's around, and he's been a virgin all of his life, and so he decides to take her up on it, and so he unclothes, and he throws his things off to the side, and he's just about to get in bed with her when the light glimmers off of the pommel of his sword, and he sees the cross, and he makes the sign of the cross in his forehead, and immediately she and the ships go up in the flame, and he feels very, very remorseful, and he does something that is actually ancient and actually anti-Christian. He feels so bad that he takes his sword and he jabs it through his thigh. Now, that's a symbol I'm certain that has meaning, because one of the, if we remember, one of the wounded kings is either King Petur or King Pelles or both, and they are wounded either in the right side or in the thighs. It's a symbol I don't completely understand, and I have I don't recall. There are two stories about the one thigh story that I do remember is that isn't it the Dionysus that is born prematurely, and Zeus cuts his thigh open and puts Dionysus in it, and he stays there until he cuts himself out or something like that. Astrologically, I can understand that as if Sagittarius rules the thigh and rules the higher mind, and that the idea of self is incubated and then later released from the higher mind to be born into the personality when the personality is strong enough and the spirit has become strong enough. But I don't understand all of this. But at any rate, what happens is he has a period of great prayer and penance, and he realizes that he almost lost something which was irrecoverable, his virginity, his purity, which is everything that Percival stands for, because his name really is called Percival the Pure. Then the old man comes back with the other ship, and the one that had told him of the serpent lady, and tells him that that was the serpent lady all over again. And he is then healed, and he's healed because of his humility, and he is healed by the very sex power that he has been able to conserve but almost lost. And he then gets on this ship, and that ends the book of Percival. And so we drop off there, and we go back to Lancelot again. Adventures of Lancelot are many. As he is leaving the abbey where he has been, he sees an ancient dead man in a white shirt of a holy order. And he runs into this hermit, and this hermit puts on a stole, which I don't understand, and he takes a book and he conjures. And oh, yes, yeah. It's the whole idea that I think part of the union with the Christ from the self nature, or the only ways to get beyond self, is to give up the whole idea of winning, because the winning is the way the individuality is defined. It stands over something, and that when you give something over to Christ, you in effect lose, but you win because it's all given back to you anyway as your responsibility and as your destiny. Only you haven't won, but something beyond you has done the winning. Okay. What happens is the old man takes the book and he begins conjuring, and a demon appears. And this is really an occult truth that saints or pure people cannot be touched by any form of conjuring, because they have the truth within themselves, they have the divinity well developed within themselves, and they cannot be overpowered from without. But all of the demons, like it or not, just like in the story of Christ casting the demons out and having them go into the flock of pigs, the demons must always follow the power of the holy people. And he starts telling the story of this old man and how he broke the order to do the good. And he broke the order to do the good by trying to overcome the negative forces by power. He reverted to force. And when you're on the spiritual path, you have to indeed live by the idea of winning by losing. And if you revert to force, that is playing into the adversary's hand. At this point, after hearing all of this, Lancelot desires to leave to seek for the Grail. And the hermit that is with him, that has been doing all of this conjuring, redresses him very strongly in his folly. And he tells him what a profane man he is, and how with all the gifts that he has been given, he's been living for himself alone. And the holy man is no doubt Nacian again, because he isn't name by name, but he has to do with all of the Grail Knights very closely. And he gives him a penance. But Lancelot unlike Gawain, takes the penance. And the penance is he must wear a shirt that is, or he must wear next to his body at all times during the quest of the Grail, hair that is the hair of a saint. And I think what this means is that he's such a bad case that he needs some extra influence to get him out of the state that he's in. Hair has always been considered excrement, and it's been part of more of the backward part of our evolutionary being, but that the hair is associated also with the emanation of etheric energies from ourselves, and probably the hair of a saint has this constant influence of a loving emanation working into his body, but it itches. And if you're sinful, clearly anything that's too good is going to make you feel uncomfortable, and it's going to prickle, and it's going to feel very bad. But Lancelot takes it, and then he lays outside to sleep. And when he's laying outside to sleep, he sees an old man surrounded by stars leading 7 kings and 2 knights. And all worship at the cross and all ask for their dues. And the old man comes down and honors all of them but one of the knights. And it says, the old man says, thou hast participated in vainglory and pleasure. You will be confounded unless you give me my treasure. And that's the dream that he has. He awakens, and when he wakes up, he meets the possessor of his horse, and he bests him in a battle, and he gets his horse and his shield back. And then he comes to another hermit, and this hermit tells him that the dream is a dream of his heredity, and it gives him his heredity, which goes back to Joseph of Arimathea, and he is one of the 2 knights, because almost everyone before him, including his father, was a king, and he is the one that participated in vainglory and fought for his honor, and he's the one that gave over to the desire to loving Guinevere. I don't know how to say it. The way that a hermit presents it to him, he doesn't shame him. He doesn't say really so much that you're bad or base or anything like that. What he does is he expounds the story in such a way that Lancelot is compared to something that is positive and something that is greater than himself, and then he shames himself. Psychologically, it's a very beautiful technique, because if someone outside you tries to tell you how base and how bad you are, it'll have only the effect of making you more refractory and being stuck in your ways. And so the positive comparison, comparing him with really good and holy forces, brings about the desired effect. Then Lancelot leaves, and he comes to a place to where there is a tournament going on. And in this tournament, there are 2 sides, white and black, and he decides to join the black forces because they are the weaker of the forces, and he wants to see a more even battle. And as the battle goes on, at first he's his old self, and then he starts getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and for the first time in his life, he has to pull off the battlefield. And he lays down to sleep, and in his sleep, a hermit rebukes him for his faithlessness. See, he's in such a place that he can't even sleep to escape. The hermits are on him everywhere. And he goes to a nun, and she tells him the dream's meaning, that those in the white were the children of Peleus, and they were against the black, which represented the darker forces, and the white represented the chastity against sin, and the white was aided by Peleus' side, which was the side of the Sangreal, and he was weakened much because he went back to his own old ways again of trying to prove himself as a champion, and he is again shamed by his actions. And I don't know how to say it. When you start entering a spiritual life, no matter how strong you were in the ways of the world before, you're going to become weak. You're going to become weak in your personal nature, because your personal nature is no longer in your own hands. There are two types of very strong people. One is very primitive and has no internal dichotomy, no internal division. When things are turned over, when the control of the physical is turned over from the lower nature to the higher nature, eventually when the higher nature completely rules, then you're ultra strong, like the adepts, that poison or almost anything else cannot harm you or destroy you. But in the meantime, when the baton is being passed from one to the other, there's a period of great weakness, and that's where Lancelot is. And he's immediately given a trial, because as soon as he leaves the nun, he meets a black knight, and he is overcome, and he gives thanks to God. So there's hope for him. Oh. How are we doing on time? This is going to be long. We're only on about page 3 of 9. Maybe we might have to meet next week, but I really don't want to. After the slaying of the 7, Gawain has no adventures for 3 months. The whole period, you might say, from Whitsun to St. John's Mass, he has no adventures. And then he starts to have adventures. He has already proven himself to be a killer. This period is an interesting period because it marks the end of the 3rd day, the period between, when Christ says, I will return to the Father on the 3rd day. On one hand, that means 3 days inclusively of solar days. So he returns, or he rises on Easter Sunday morn. In another sense, the Christ cycle, if this is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, the return to the Father in the Ascension occurs in the 3 months from the crucifixion at the vernal equinox until midsummer, and those are the 3 days. There's another level that you can look at it as, and you can look at it on the another part of the zodiac in another way. You can see it precessionally, the signs Pisces, Aquarius, and Capricorn, and somewhere on the 3rd day would be the return of the Christ Father in the second coming. And these days are rather long days, something like 2100 and some years. I think 2156, but that's neither there. But eventually, Gawain meets one of the other knights. He meets Lancelot's brother, Ector. And Ector is also very tired of this quest. And Ector and Gawain are, how would you say it, they're nationalists. And a lot of the Grail adventure involves going to foreign lands, and they don't want to go to foreign lands. In fact, most of the names of kings and such like that are in French. So you know that quite a bit of the Grail story took place in France. But at any rate, they proceed along together, and they come to this small abandoned chapel. And not being holy men, when they sit down to pray, they fall asleep. And while they're asleep, they each have a dream. And Gawain's dream is that he's in a meadow of herbs, and there are 150 black bulls, except for 3 which are white, and one of the 3 has a black spot. Sound familiar? There's a lot of parallelism. But the 3 bulls are tied together mutually with 2 strong cords. The other bulls are so weak that they can barely stand. And so they all decide to seek a better pasture. When the whitest bull starts to move, they all leave to find this better pasture. And the black bulls set up a cry, but they're so weak that when they all bellow out, it wins them, and they all go back to the old pasture in various different directions. Hector, on the other hand, has a dream that he and Lancelot are sitting in one chair, and they both leap out of the one chair at the same time, and they say, we go to seek what we find not. Lancelot is defeated and despoiled, and he's clothed in an army of, in an array of knots, and he rides on an ass. And he comes to a well, the most beautiful well that he's ever seen, and every time he bends over to drink some water, the water pulls away. And Hector comes to a rich man's wedding in his dream, and he comes to the door, and he hears from inside the door, "Sir, here is no place for you." Rather grim dreams. They awake and they marvel and they talk about their visions, which is the first thing they've had happen in 3 months. And as they're sitting there talking, an arm appears. And this arm is completely covered, and it's covered with red silk. And over the arm there's a bridle. And the bridle is holding a candle. And as the arm appears, then a voice comes out and it says, "Knights of evil faith and of poor belief, these things have you failed. Therefore you cannot come to adventures of the Sangreal." And so they go to find a hermit, and they meet somebody along the wayside, and they're told that on a rough mountain is where Nacien has his cottage, and you'll recognize it right away because it's the poorest of all of the houses for miles around. And on the way there, they meet a knight who challenges them, and Gawain jousts with him and just runs them right through. And it turns out to be somebody of the Grail. It turns out to be Sir Uwaine, the son of King Uriens. And they carry him to a place where he is to be buried. And when they pull the spear out of him, he dies on the spot. And after they've buried him, they go to find Nacien to confess. You see what's happening here, because these are all setups. They're all very much setups, because this is fratricide. And before the last holy adventure they're given an opportunity See, Lancelot sort of passed his last opportunity by not feeling bad when he was overcome. Gawain has to run the guy through and then find out it's his own brother knight, and he's guilty of fratricide and vainglory, and he's a murderer. Anyway, they find Nacien gathering wild herbs, and he's been eating nothing but vegetables for hundreds of years. And Nacien says, Gawain, you're a murderer. The metal in your dream is the round table, and you ought to take the color of humility and patience, because the grass is green and it is alive. And he says the 150 black bulls represent the knights of the round table, but they're all weak. And that the 3 white ones represent Percival, Galahad, and Bors. It doesn't talk about the 2 ropes, but it's an interesting meditation on the 2 ropes, because the lines of cause to consequence and consequence to cause, or the line of consciousness that goes from extroversion and introversion coming back, represent the 2 streams of consciousness through which the threefold spirit is tied together. And the divinity that was divided, the unity that was divided into duality to become the 3 still has the duality within it, and those 2 directions of consciousness are present with it. But at any rate, the seeking of a new pasture means that they're looking for a higher life than the life of selfish indulgence that they have. But because they have no patience and no humility, they're too weak to withstand. 3 attain, but 2 stay beyond. Then he interprets the other dream, and he says, Lancelot and Lionel come from one lordship. And they both have the same father. Lancelot is proud and he needs humilification, and that's why he's wearing a knotted hair shirt. And he has the desire that leads to greater seeking, but he's still denied. He's not worthy of the Grail because he lives in deadly sin. And they are told that Lancelot will have a 20-day penance, or they say that right now he's going through a 24-day penance for the 24 years of sin. And the Nacien tells him that Lancelot, even though he's a sinner now, will die a holy man. Which part of the Knights of the Round Table, we won't get to that. We'll barely get done with the Grail tonight. Have to hold the Grail up or we'll get too tired and not even make it through the night. But it's interesting to see the types of visions that each of them has. Since Lionel and Lancelot are brothers, the visions that they have are not as symbolic. They are much more historical, because they have closer ties through the etheric energy that runs through their bloodstream, and they have common ties in the same way that twins know what's happening to each other. And so the kind of dream that Gawain has is highly symbolic, but the dream that Hector, Lancelot and Hector are brothers, and because they are both brothers, they carry that common bond, and one would dream about the other. Okay, I'm going to pass. There's a bunch of other material there. And then Nacien tells them what the true vision was that they had. That under the red cloth was the Grail, which is covered over to them forever because they're sinful and can't see it. And the bridle represented abstinence, and that neither of them had been abstinent either in their desire to prove themselves or in sexuality, and they did not seek the light of truth. They refused penances earlier, And because they weren't seeking the light of truth, they had failed in what the Grail is all made of, and that they wouldn't have, they won't come to the Grail, they won't probably have any more adventures. Then as Ector leaves, Nacien tells Gawain a little bit more about Lancelot, and shares him a few more truths of his life, and Gawain leaves to follow Ector. And that brings us now to the book of Bors. Bors is one of the people. This is a very long, complicated story, and it's really filled with all kinds of stuff. Bors is one of the knights who accomplishes, in the way we're looking at it, he represents the human spirit. As he's riding along, he runs into a hermit who is riding on an ass, whose counsel he seeks immediately. He says, "Father, I don't know what I'm doing. I need your counsel." It's most likely Nacien. He isn't always named by name. And the hermit tells him, in effect, none shall attain but by cleanliness. That is pure confession. Meaning to say that as long as you have the consequences and the seeds of sinful desires, of sinful tendencies in your aura, you can't possibly go into the inner worlds. Because if you try to go into the inner worlds, those will be activated by the forces that are in the inner worlds, and you'll be led so far astray so quickly that you'll be lucky to come out of it alive. But as we've seen in earlier talks, that the confession also is the means, or the retrospection is the means that the soul power is extracted from our past deeds, and we need that soul power in order to be able to function in the inner worlds. So they go to a hermitage, and Bors confesses very, very thoroughly. And then they sit down to a meal of bread and water. And then the hermit gives him his charges. He says, while you're on the quest to the Grail, you must eat only bread and water, nothing else. And you must sleep on the ground. You may not sleep in a bed. And you must wear this scarlet coat that I'm going to give you until the quest is over. Meaning to say that, as we've said before, in the members of the Trinity, the first member of the Trinity is always associated with blue, the second with yellow, and coming into the individuality with the human spirit, the Holy Spirit, the color is red. Remember earlier, for a long time, Galahad was seen as a knight wearing red, or wearing a red shirt all the time. That is, we must take on the color of the blood of the Christ, so to speak, and we must take on the quality of individuality, because unless one is a strong individual, that individuality will not allow, without that individuality, they will not be able to enter into the inner world. You have to have a strong sense of self. You have to be well-defined. If you're not well-defined, you'll be overcome by everything. In the same way that people that have multiple personalities, which are a consequence of having a very weak sense of self, when there is that weak sense of self, any kind of force that comes in the inner world overcomes individual, and they take on the character of that. As he's riding along, he sees up in this bare tree, he sees a very unusual circumstance. He sees this great big bird, which in other forms is the same symbolism. This is the earliest I've ever found this symbolism. And this bird is sitting next to its babes in the nest. And as Bors is watching, the bird pecks into its own breast and opens it up, and pulls out its heart and feeds its young with its heart. And this is the earliest Rosicrucian symbol that I've seen anywhere. It's mentioned in quite a few places centuries on later in Rosicrucian mysteries and in Masonry. It's a very common symbol, but it's the whole ideal that once he has taken on a way of living, what is presented to him is the kind of life that he must have. This self that he has in wearing red, he must sacrifice that for the sake of others. Because there's no way that we can rise into the inner world except by taking responsibilities, and everything that we become, we must give to those that need it, those that are below us, those that are of lesser development, and without doing that, we can't get anywhere. And so that's what he does. Then he comes to a lady who has lost her inheritance. Remember, the familiar theme that comes up again. And instead of it being 7 knights this time, it is Purim Lenore. Only this time it's a single adversary. At this point, he has a very unusual dream. And in this dream, he sees a great big white bird that is like a swan. And he sees a smaller black bird that is like a raven. And the white bird says, "Give me meat, and I will give you the riches of the world and make you as white as me." The black bird says, "Save me tomorrow despite my blackness, and it will avail thee more than the other's whiteness." Then he bops awake, and then he falls back to sleep, and he has another dream. And in this dream, he's in a chapel, and to the left is a worm-eaten chair. And on the right, there are 2 flowers that look like white lilies. Only the stronger of the 2 flowers is about to choke out the other, and then someone comes and separates them, and then they both flourish and have many other flowers and are very fruitful. And then he thinks he hears the man say, "Folly to perish to these 2 to succor the rotten tree." And then Boer says, "It seems to me this wood won't survive." And then the man in the dream says, "Make certain it doesn't happen to you." And he wakes up, and he's very much troubled by his dream, but he doesn't let it bother him, and he goes to morning chapel, and he refuses breakfast, and he battles with Pritam, and he overcomes him, and as you would expect, he spares him, even though he's a really monster. And one by one, he goes to all of the people who have taken away her riches. Clearly, you can see there's a great allegory in this. And he gets all of her riches back for her. And this quest is done. Clearly, the bride or the feminine from heaven is lost her inheritance to, again, the 7 brothers. And he wins all of them back for her. So when he's done with that, he starts going through the forest. And as he's going through the forest, he sees his brother. His brother is Lionel. And when he sees his brother is naked, and his arms are tied together in front of him like this, and 2 men are leading him along, and they're flogging him with a mace made of, or a whip that is made of thorns, and his whole body is bloody, fore and aft. And he's just about to go to his rescue when off to the other side, he sees this young gentlewoman who is forcibly being taken by a knight and is clearly about to be hauled off and raped. And Boers is closer to where we are. If you understand clearly that if Boers represents the human spirit, that is the thinking power of intellection in our being, thinking often has to decide. It isn't like Percival that could take on all 7 at the same time and win by losing to them. Boers is left with decisions, and he doesn't know which to do. Now, if he weren't at all a Knight of the Grail, he might sit like I sometimes tend to do and lose both opportunities for not knowing which one to choose, and he does the right thing. He thinks he's doing the right thing. He makes a quick judgment. He does it by intuitive prompting, and he gets down on his knees and he prays to Christ, keep my brother alive. He's still alive yet while I save the woman, which can't at all take care of herself, and she is about to lose something that she can't gain. He overcomes the knight that was about to rape her, and just as he does so, her knights come up, and there are 12 of them, and he hands her over to them, and he goes on his way. He races back to find his brother. And as he races back, he runs into this holy man he's all in black, and he says, your brother's dead. And he takes him and shows the body. It looks the shape of his brother, but it's so messed up that he can't really tell. And so they go back, they take the body to a chapel, and they put it in a mausoleum-like crypt. And he asks the priest to interpret these dreams that he's had. And the priest says something very interesting. He says, I'll interpret half today and half tomorrow. And he says, the white bird is a rich lady who has had 3 previous lovers. And she loves you dearly. And she wants you to lie with her. And if you do, your cousin Lancelot, who is now in bondage and in danger of death, will be freed. He will not die. And the priest tells him, you've already been responsible for your brother's death. Don't let down your cousin. And he says, don't worry about the sex thing. He says, you've already proven your virginity by saving this virgin who didn't mean a thing to you. So it won't even count as a loss. And he asks Boers if he gets what he's saying. And Boers says, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And so the priest takes him to a tower that's right near this chapel where the mausoleum is, or where the crypt is. And when he goes in, Boers is treated wondrously. And they put an ermine wrap around him. And he's really well received, and everybody gives him a good time. And pretty soon he forgets all about Lancelot and Lionel, his cousin and brother, and he's no longer weeping, and he's pretty happy. He doesn't, there are all kinds of dainties to eat there, but he doesn't eat them. He turns them down. Then this beautiful lady comes in, and she tells him how much she's loved him and how much she's always loved him, and asks him to sleep with her. He gets uncomfortable and he says, my brother just died. I don't know if I can do that. And she persists, and he says, no, on no account will I sleep with you. And she says, I'll die if you don't sleep for you. I'll die for your love. And he says, no way. And what do? She and 12 of her ladies go to the top of the tower, and they stand on the edge, and they say that and she says, if you don't sleep with me, we're going to jump off. In short, meaning to say that you're going to be responsible for your brother Lionel's death, your cousin Lancelot's death, and for the 13 of us. And he says, no way. And they jump off, and then there's a great noise, and everything disappears. The tower, the chapel, everything disappears. And Bors gets down on his knees, and he prays, and the next morning he finds an abbot. And without even a hint, the abbot tells him the whole business. He says, the bird that you saw in the tree was the Christ, sacrificing his life for ours, and that is your life. And the lady whose inheritance he saved was the new church, the church of love and purity. The blackbird, there was the new law, the law of love and purity, and the blackbird represented the church, and the white bird was the bird of hypocrisy, something like a fiend or an antichrist. The other man, holy man that he saw was obviously a fake. He was a shill of some kind. And the worm-eaten tree was his brother Lionel, who was kind of rotten, which he couldn't save anyway. And the two white flowers were the maid and the rapist, who he did have to save. And he tells Bors, you're a simple fool, but you've made it. It's like, this is the whole idea, like in the new ways, when you take on the new ways, or anytime you do anything new, you have to be a simpleton, and you have to be as simple and straightforward, because the whole of the Grail story, for all of the complex images in that, the spirit of the Grail Knights is very simple, very, very humble, such like that. And what has happened here, I want to talk about just a little bit. I'm flying through this much faster than I ever intended to. The idea here is that the false priest, remember when we talked about black magic and the symbols of black magic being almost identical to those of white magic, except in one small detail? This is the case here. The fiend, the false priest, gives only half-truths. You can take all of these things really literally. He says, I'll interpret half today and half tomorrow, whereas the second priest that comes along, without prompting, knows already what he has seen, both with his eyes and in his dreams, and he tells him right out, there's no holding back on the truth whatsoever. It's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It's, you can't have incomplete truths. The Spirit does things by intuitions, and the Spirit does things by wholes. Everything that's born of the Spirit is born complete and whole and balanced. And it's interesting here that this whole trial is a trial by illusion. It was obvious that, like when the tower and the chapel and everything disappear, that was an illusion. But if you read the description of all of Boer's adventures compared to the visions, compared to the visions of others, it says it was a bird that was like a swan. And it was, it wasn't the reality, because the other knights were more materialistic, and their visions took on materialistic forms which were symbolic. And in Boer's, that power of discrimination, where you have to tell that something is like something but not quite it, represents the kind of subtlety and the kind of discrimination that's necessary to enter into the inner worlds, because without that subtlety, you'll take things for granted, and you won't be a simple fool, and you'll get yourself in all sorts of trouble. Which Bors does anyway, because he exchanges blessings with the abbot, and who treats him as an equal. And he seeks out new adventure, and he comes to a chapel in the forest, and he's just about to go into the chapel, and who does he meet but Lionel, his brother. And Lionel wasn't killed. That was all part of an illusion also. And Lionel didn't take this all very easily. And so what he does, the first thing he does is he curses out Bors. And then he chains him. And finally he says, defend yourself. You wouldn't defend me. You're going to have to defend yourself now, because I'm going to do you in. And Bors falls to his knees and pray, and he won't fight. So Lionel says, that's not good enough. He gets on his horse, he runs him over. He has the horse trot on him until he's down on the ground. And he's stomped on. And then Lionel gets off his horse, and he draws his sword, and he's going to cut his brother's head off. And then a hermit comes running out of the wood, and he throws himself on Bors to protect him. And the hermit gets killed. At this point, Lionel is still going to kill him. He's really in a rage. He's in a frenzy. And at this point, Sir Colgrevance comes up, and he's one of the Knights of the Round Table, and he sees that Lionel's about to kill his brother, and the guy's defenseless. He's just been run over and stomped on by a horse. And Colgrevance says, I'll fight with you to protect your brother. And so they start fighting, and Lionel, being of the line of Ban, the same line that Lancelot and Hector are of, is a much better fighter. And he starts overcoming Colgrevance. They have a long fight. And at first, Bors can't do anything because he's still too weak. But toward the end of this long fight, he's starting to get strong, and Colgrevance asks for help. And Bors says, no, I'm not going to do it. And then what happens is eventually Lionel overcomes him and kills Colgrevance. And there is Bors still on the ground praying yet. And then Lionel says, well, you're going to get it now. I'm coming over. I'm going to kill you. And so Bors prays, and he draws his sword, and he decides that he will not strike any blows, but he will defend himself only. And just as the fight is about to break out, a whirling cloud of fire comes in between them, and it burns both of their shields, and a voice comes out of the cloud and says, don't do it. Don't fight with each other. Forgive each other. And this is enough to calm Lionel down. And they forgive each other. They truly do forgive each other. And they part and go their way. Clearly, in this case, it was a matter of this is exactly like the Bible. In the time of Christ, which is what the Holy Grail is, it's a rapid seeking of the time of Christ, brother shall be set against brother. Only Bors persists in the Christ way, and he passes the trial that Gawain, for example, could not pass, in that he doesn't fight with his brother, and he doesn't do any killing. And then something comes in that goes all the way back to the Eleusinian mysteries that we talked about last. So the voice, like the voice of the Hierophant, commands to go to the sea. That is to say, he's risen above the dichotomies and he's now ready for chaos. Let me go to the sea, because the sea is holy creative chaos. And when he gets to the sea, a vessel that's lined with white silk pulls up, and he boards it, and when he gets on it, he sleeps on the boards of the ship. When he wakes up, he finds himself with Percival. They're both at the sea now, and they're both overjoyed, and they tell stories, and they say, all we need is Galahad. And obviously, from here on in, the story switches to Galahad, and it is as usual with Galahad. There isn't much about him. He's so invincible and he's so mysterious that there aren't many things that happen to him that you can get a detailed understanding of him. After Galahad rescued Percival from the seven, he rides into a tournament where the white knights are being bested by the black knights, including Gawain and Ector, and he aids the castle knights, and he overcomes the other knights, including Ector and Gawain, especially Gawain, with using the sword. Remember the sword that he pulled out of the stone? He gives Gawain such a blow that it goes right through his shield and cuts into his shoulder blade, then glances off and cuts the leg off the horse. He didn't kill the horse, though. He left that for Gawain to do. And at this point, even though Ector and Gawain knew that it was Galahad and tried to avoid him, they couldn't avoid him. And when Gawain is injured, he remembers Launcelot's prophecy. Remember when they were all standing around on Whitsun? They were all standing around at the river where the floating stone was with the sword is in it. Launcelot said, I'm not even going to try to pull that thing out. And he said, whoever presumes to touch that sword thinking he's the greatest in Christendom is going to be struck by it. And Gawain was the first one to try it, and Gawain is the one that is struck by it, and he's finished. It's all done for him. And he goes out with violence because what finished him was violence along the way. And then Galahad goes toward a place that he knows well. He goes to the hermitage that's right within sight of Castle Carbonek, which is the Grail Castle. In the night, only after he slept an hour or something like that, a woman comes for him, a young maid, and the two of them ride together to the Castle Calaby, which is near the sea, and they get only an hour of sleep or something like that again, and the next night she takes them and they go to the sea, to the ship where Bors and Percival are. Now we have the complete formation. We have Galahad. We have Percival. And we have Bors. And we have something else. We have the young maid, the virgin young maid, the virgin spirit who is in the center of the three. And these three now take up most of the story of the Grail. So you can say then that the virgin spirit is surrounded by each of the three members of the threefold spirit, and this is what is necessary for consummating the Grail. And from here on in, it is a very transcendental story, but there are stories within stories within stories on it. Get on the ship, and the ship takes them to a place. There really is a place like this, that it's off the British Isles in the North Sea, where it's one of the only places in the world that, according to tides and currents in the sea, where there is a whirlpool. And it is a place where there are two rocks that stand near each other. Now, this is a universe, even though there is a place physically like this in the North Sea, this is a symbol that is found universally in quest myths. For example, if we had chosen the quest myth of the golden fleece, the Argonauts come to the place where they have to go, where they have to avoid being sucked into the whirlpool, and they have to go through the clashing rocks, which batter back and forth without getting crushed. Odysseus, in his wandering epic, also has to go through the same place. I don't know all of the meanings of this symbol. If I did, I would probably be an initiate. But if I understand it correctly, that this is the direction, that the voyage is the direction of the attention, where the whirlpool is the spinning of the primary vertex of consciousness, and that the clashing rocks, I believe, is the pineal gland in its movement that sets up the current between the pituitary body that opens the inner vision, so that the silent watcher, which is the focus of the virgin spirit, can see into the spiritual worlds. This is a thing that is very common. In fact, I think at the end of this, in one of the ancient myths, that the two rocks clash together and they stay clashed together, which means a state of perpetual clairvoyance. But that's only one of the meanings. I'm sure there are others that I haven't come to understanding yet. While they're out in the sea, they meet with a ship called Faith. And this ship has a message on its prow saying, "Don't come on me, because I am Faith, and unless you have faith, it's going to be the end of you coming onto this ship." Now, this is something, again, that goes back to things that we've been talking about for 2 years. Remember, Moses was put in a basket, and Perseus was put in a casket, and Osiris was put in a casket, and they were all put out to sea or out to the river Nile and carried to the sea. In this case, we are at chaos. We are looking into the spiritual worlds. And it is only when we have this kind of simple faith, because if we remember, like when Perseus and his mother were put into the wooden box, they were just cast out onto the sea on their own. It's always an act of faith. When Moses was put into the little basket, and he was later found in the bulrushes, this was also an act of faith. Ultimately, when we enter into the spiritual worlds, we don't enter by knowledge. Knowledge comes to us eventually, but the only thing that can carry us with the kind of consciousness that is necessary into the inner worlds with any safety or with any lucidity at all is faith. So the journey in the, you might say the journey in the box is sort of like the whole creation itself. Because if you remember, the dimensions of the casket that Osiris was put into were exactly, that casket was built exactly to size for him. And he tried it out and fit perfectly, and they locked him into it. Meaning to say that the manifest quality of the divine fits perfectly into the world. But even for the Supreme Being, or to the God of our solar being, that the creative act is not a sure, a cut and dried thing, because if it were, it wouldn't be a creative act. It's an act of faith that relative to the unknown of the absolute, relative to that darkness, to enter into it, and as an act of love in faith, it's a creation in the unknown. And so this is what they do. Okay, they're taking this act of faith. I don't know if I missed something here, but it turns out that the unnamed lady, that is the young virgin maid, is the sister of Percival, which is to say that in the same way that the divine spirit is the masculine force of will and the life spirit is the feminine force of imagination, the feminine of the life spirit is like the feminine purity and innocence of the virgin spirit. So in the symbolism follows very clearly, follows very beautifully. When they get onto the ship, this is when the lady discloses that she's the sister of Percival, and on the ship is a bed with a silk crown over it, and there is a sword in a scabbard. And this sword is partly out of the scabbard. Oh boy. There are so many things in here. One of the parts of the handle of the sword is a serpent's tooth. The other part is a bone out of the fish Urtanix. And the fish Urtanix lives only in the Euphrates River near Babylon, where the Euphrates drained out of the Garden of Eden. The quality of it is that if you grab the handle of the sword, that the serpent's tooth side makes you so that you never tire and so that you never can receive a wound that you will be killed by as long as you're holding the sword, the handle of the sword. The quality of the fishbone that is the other part of the sword's handle is such that you'll be able to focus on whatever you have to focus on without joy and without sorrow. And when you can do that, you can accomplish what you need to accomplish without being pulled one way or another. You have a wonderful equipoise. And the two of them make you invulnerable. And it says on the sword, only the peerless shall grip me, or something to that effect. I have a very shortened thing. And on the other side it says, who shall draw me out shall never be shamed or wounded to death. Here we have again, for the warrior, the sword represents the vehicle of consciousness, the vehicle of truth. This sword is supposedly the sharpest of all swords that had ever been made. And therefore it is the truth that cuts everything else. It's talking about the vehicle of consciousness, the tool that is necessary to reach the spiritual level through which you can get behind everything else and all illusion, at which time you are in such a place that you are in the consciousness of the divine in such a way that you can't really be harmed. At this point, Sis, who has spent her whole life telling stories, tells many, many, many stories, and I don't know how to tell them all. And they're all so beautiful and they're all so pithy that they're really wonderful. She tells the story of an ancient king, King Herling, who was a Saracen who became a Christian, and he is the father of one of the wounded kings who delivers a dolorous stroke and produces a wasteland and the demise of himself. The scabbard itself is the most fair, except it says on one side, only the most fair and virgin knight can open it. And on the other side it says, look out, I'm fickle the first time, but the second time I'm grabbed, I'm all right. Sis then starts telling stories about at one time in the history of this sword, Nasian, when he was still a warrior, was fighting a giant. And he takes this sword and uses it to fight the giant, and the sword is broken. And it is again repaired by a king of the time, King Modreans or something like that, and is given back to Nasian. But when he puts it in the scabbard, he wounds himself in the foot, and he himself is wounded by his incontinence. And finally, King Pelles, when he tries to wield the sword, is injured through both thighs or in the right side by a spear, the spear of Longinus that appears from the inner worlds. So what we're trying to say is all of the meaning of the experience that the Grail Knights that are coming to the Grail, all of the meaning of their trip is told to them by Sis, who represents the Virgin Spirit, which has been impressed by everything we've ever done since our beginning, but is in itself still virgin to actual direct participation in creation. And what she is doing is she is telling the history of the abuse and the generations of people who have been wounded by the creative energy in its abuse, how it was abused first for sex and then for murder. And but this is really very short. I can't cut it any shorter. And after Galahad draws the sword, and they've had this experience of it, and Galahad is so pure that it happens all very easily for him. And they start looking at the bed. And the bed, 3 of the spindles of the bed that go up to its silk crown are each different color woods. One is white, one is green, and one is red. But they're not painted. It's all, they're like the color as though they were jewels of that color, but the color is right in the wood. So we're again back at another story again. This brings it much more intimately. Remember when we were talking about the story of Siegfried, we talked about Hunding having this bed that had as one of its corners a tree, and that tree itself was part of the world ash, the Yggdrasil tree. Odysseus had the same kind of tree. In this case here we have a bed, a canopied bed, meaning to say it's protected over by the consciousness of the divine. The canopy is called the silken crown, and it has 3 spindles made of different colors. The 4th spindle is never mentioned because that's probably, again, associated with the invisible and the unspoken. And Sis again starts telling the stories that before the fall into conscious procreation, Adam and Eve, when they were going through the garden gathering apples, Eve takes a slip or a cutting from the tree of life, and she plants it, and because God wills, it grows. And when she planted it in purity, the wood that it grew was white wood. Eventually, she and Adam mate at the command of Jehovah, the Holy Ghost, and they mate under the tree, and when they unite, then the color of emotion and feeling, and eventually the color of murky passion, and eventually beyond that the color of compassion, green. And from then on, the tree grows greenwood. And then when Cain slew Abel, he slew him under that same tree, which means that the violent quality, the letting of the blood, and the principle, again, of selfhood, only improperly manifest. When Cain slew Abel under the tree, then the tree grew nothing but redwood. Much later on, when Solomon becomes king, he knew all about trees and stars, and he was told, you have an evil wife, but you will have in your line of a virgin the purest, the last, a pure knight. And he tells his wife, and she says, oh, I know what you should do. You should build a ship of the strongest wood. And he does. And she says, for this night, you should build the sharpest sword. And this is the sword of David that becomes Solomon, that is the sword that is in the scabbard. And then she commands the carpenter to make a bed. And she gives him the tree, that slip of the tree of life, which is now a huge tree. And the carpenter fusses because he doesn't want to cut that tree down. He knows what it is. And he does it, though. He's commanded to. And when he does it and starts cutting into the wood itself bleeds. When the bed is made, the first and probably only person before Galahad to lay in this bed is Solomon. And when Solomon lays in the bed, he sees angels ascending and descending and such like that. And he has an understanding basically of the whole cosmos of involution and evolution, and how this is all to be redeemed and saved and turned around by this virgin knight who is to come at the end of the line. At this point, Sis brings out, she has a little gold casket, and she says she has a girdle that she has made on which the scabbard can hang, and it's made of her own hair, which represents filaments or lines of consciousness that penetrate right into the virgin spirit. And the sword is then called the sword of girdles. None shall see the part of the sheath, because part of the sheath is made from the tree of life that had blood in its veins. And I believe that's again associated with the fourth unseen pole of the bed. So we're presented then with the two trees, the tree of death, which is the pole that proceeds into matter. Because the further the spirit goes into matter, the more it falls into matter, the more it loses the life of the realm of pure spirit, until eventually all we see is matter and we have complete death. This tree is sometimes seen as an upside down tree. And then we have the tree of life, which we looked a little bit at in the myth of Perseus, and that the tree of life is the property of, again, the other pole, going back to the spirit where everything is kept alive and everything is perpetually reborn in the spirit, is live and full and always reborn. So the four pillars of the bed represent like the four sides of logic. They talk about the building of the cosmos And it is the three of the manifest spirit in the unknown, hidden part of creation. Because no matter how much we consciously assert will and imagination and thinking in our creation, the creation still comes from some invisible part that we don't know of, the divine part of our being, the virgin part of our being. Clearly, the bed in the ship is the symbol within the symbol, because if we said last time that sitting in a throne is a seat of consciousness, lying in a bed in a vehicle of faith, that the bed is even more a state of repose. And this is a state of repose where there is complete rest and relaxation. It is completely suspended in faith. I'd like to go into something else on the side, but this is taking way too long, so I'm just going to have to skip that. After Galahad buckles on the sword, they leave the ship of faith and return to their own ship. They can't go up into that realm, that higher realm of consciousness, and stay there forever. Now they have these spiritual vehicles or this spiritual power. Now is time to use them. No sooner do they get in their own ship and the winds blow up and blows them ashore opposite of Scotland, which is probably in France. And they are warned as soon as they get off the ship that if they proceed to the castle, which has not a Scotch name but a French name, Catalois, I don't know how to, my notes are very bad here. But they are unafraid of death. And first they're attacked by 10. And they chase these 10 into the castle, and then they are attacked by many. And they fight until all are overcome, all are done, and it turns out that they're all fiends. Armed now with the ultimate of power, they have to overcome everything in themselves, because you have to be completely pure. And so this is what they've done. When they're all done, they've been told that they have defeated antichrists, and they redeemed the person whose castle it really was. And after they bury everyone and clean everything up, they leave, and when they leave, they see 4 lions. And the 4 lions are following a hart. And the hart leads the 4 lions and the Grail Knights, along with Sis, and into a chapel. And then the hart transforms into a man. And 3 of the lions turn into the other animals of the Sphinx. One turns into an eagle, one turns into a bull, and one turns into a human. And they then become the 4 Gospelers. And the man who was the hart, followed by the other 4, the lion, the eagle, the bull, and the man, they all go right through the window of the chapel without breaking it. And they are told that it is like the way that the Virgin Mary was conceived. No resistance from selfish desire, that there is a complete passing through because there is no selfish ego. There is a virginity in motivation, and that is the way the Christ was conceived. Our hermit then comes into the chapel and tells them, well, the heart was Christ, and he's been seen that way many times. And they spend the night there, and the next morning they're off again on an adventure. They don't know where. And some people come up with a silver dish, and they come to Sis, and they say, we want to fill this dish with blood out of your right arm. And this is the custom, because if we have blood that comes out of your right arm, that the lady that is now in a state like death, will be brought back to life. And Galahad says, that is a strange and unnatural custom. You can't have her. And they defeat these people who want the blood. And as soon as they've defeated them, Sis turns around and says, all right, you can have my blood. You need to say it wasn't forced on them. This is a tradition that has gone on for many, many years, and other people who have been seeking the Grail have gone through the same trial, and this is the first time that it was completely voluntary. Again, we see it's a symbol like the bird that pecked out his heart. And she lays down, that she gives her blood up, and the lady comes to life, and she dies. And they are commanded to put her body on a barge or a ship and leave it there, and then later on, after the Grail is all over, that they're to bury her at Castle Carbonek. And the three of them part and each go their own way, which brings us back to Lancelot. I told you this was long. We're not too far now. We only have only a page and a quarter, a page and a half. Lancelot comes after having all of these adventures, losing his horse and all of that, comes to the water, and when he comes to the water's edge, he feels a great peril. And it does what it does to him these days. It makes him weak, and he lays down to sleep. And as he sleeps, the voice tells him, take the first ship. And he gets on the first ship feeling wonderful, only to find out that it is the ship that is carrying Sis, for want of a better name. And if we're saying that the threefold spirit and that Lancelot represents the champion and not the hero, that he represents the lower self, focused in the lower mind, that after the knights have accomplished what they have accomplished, and the virgin spirit has laid down its life voluntarily in blood, that corpse, or the virgin spirit, then enters in at the seat, or the seed atom of the mind, that is at the focus in our conscious being in the physical world, and there comes to be a union between the transcendental realm of our true spiritual being and the attributes that we have that are divine attributes. They become united in the formation with Lancelot, and we're just about ready now for the complete completion of the Grail, which means the deification. Lancelot stays a month on the ship, and he is sustained completely by mana, which is exactly as it was in the Old Testament. They are sustained by that which came down from heaven. The self is the same as where our word man comes from. A mana that came from heaven. Manas is our selfhood came into our mind in the wandering in the wilderness, and so he is sustained by that. One day, he decides to go ashore and take a walk. He's got cabin fever. He can't stand being on the ship all the time. And he's walking along, Galahad comes riding up. And they greet each other, and they have a grand old time together, and they share their stories together. And finally Galahad has to leave, and they part their way, promising to pray for each other. And then a voice says, you shall not meet again until the day of doom. Anyway, Lance goes back to the ship, and he's blown offshore for many months. He's continually living out there. And one night at midnight, after he's been praying, it runs to the ground, and a voice tells him, "Your prayer has been answered in part. Go to the castle." And as he's going along to the castle, he grabs for his sword in case there are lions about. And the voices say to him, "Where is your faith? Here we're giving you, after all the experience you had, you're still in mortal fear and still want to defend yourself." And he comes to the castle, and it's deserted. And he hears voices singing something like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, "Joy and honor to the Father in heaven." And he enters in, and it's all wonderfully lit. And he comes to this door, and the door opens, and it says, "Enter and you shall repent." And he looks inside, and he sees the Grail, and it's covered with the red silk again, samite, and there are angels hovering over it with a cross and with a candle, and there is a priest tending to them, and up above, suspended in the air, are three men. Again, all of these same things. He's still seeing this in symbolic mode and not in true spiritual mode. And he prays and decides to enter in to receive the Grail. Like a good Catholic, he can't pass up communion. And he gets knocked down, and he's left for dead, and people come running into the Grail Castle, and for 24 days he is dead in a coma. Remember the prophecy that he would have 24 days of penance, that he would be left like dead? And when he awakens, he looks to the side, and he sees the hermit's hair there, and he feels that he's failed. And instead, he's dressed, they dress him back up, but they put the hair back on him. And they put his shirt on, and they put him in a scarlet robe. And he visits with the Grail King, King Pelles. And as he's visiting, there's a noise that's heard at the door. And they say, "Who is there?" And he says, "I am Ector, a knight of the Grail." And it's Lancelot's brother. And Pelles says to him, "You are a sinful man. You have no part here." And it drives him out. And this fulfills the other prophecy. Remember the prophecy that Ector had when the dream that he had when he and Gawain were together, that he would come to the door and be told that he was a sinful man and not be able to enter in. And he makes his way back to the round table, only to find that half have died. Lancelot comes to his own, restores his health at the Castle Carbonek, and he goes back to the round table, and he reports everything to King Arthur and Guinevere, and he then prophesies that 3 shall actually receive the Holy Grail, but only 1 will come back to the round table. So finally, the ending comes, the grand miracle. Galahad has been searching long, and he finally comes to an abbey where he comes to where one of the wounded kings is lying. He's been lying there many years, and it's King Madrigan's. And when he enters into the chapel, the king recognizes him and says, "It's like a lily and a rose meeting to see you." Meaning to say that in Galahad is the innocence of the lily. He says it literally, is the innocence of the lily and the spirit of the rose. We've talked about this before, that the children of the water, that is, those of the mystic temperament, have always been symbolized by lilies, and they've been associated with the divine kings or the initiates have always been associated with the rose because of the rosy aura, and that in Galahad the two find a union, and what happens is Galahad prays for Christ to enter him, and he hugs King Mordregans, and King Mordregans is healed. And he, as soon as he is healed, he dies. Next he goes to Gore, where he goes to a flaming tomb, and then he finds King Bagdemagus, the son and betrayer of Joseph of Arimathea, and he heals him, and he immediately dies. Do you understand what we're trying to talk about here? Those same principles that we talked about earlier, the 7 principles of our being, which are certainly far too august and far too great for us to speak of in a short amount of time, are not only to be found in each of the vehicles, they are to be found, so to speak, as kings of each of the realms. That is to say, in a Ptolemaic kind of universe, each realm of consciousness is its orb, is its sphere of influence. And each of these in the downward path has violated the creative energy in order to make manifest. That is a creative act. But this is a necessary sacrifice in some ways, because realm after realm is born out of the completion of the realm above it. And it remains wounded as each more material and more concentrated realm is born out of the one before. It is wounded and it is incomplete. And in the consciousness of Galahad, one by one is the redemption, the expansion of consciousness to each of these realms, and each of them are healed by Galahad, and when they're healed, they're made whole. And when they're made whole, their existence is no longer necessary, because the consciousness that was within them is withdrawn, and they can then die, and Galahad can rise to the next higher level. So that the round table, when it says that the round table and the redemption of the round table is the earth, it means not only the whole earth, and not only the whole orbit of the earth, but it represents the earth as the whole primordial atom. And that as the primordial atom is redeemed in layer after layer of its existence, the whole of creation is fulfilled. And in the same way that we're talking about this as an initiatory myth, and that the heroes that consummate the Grail, and in this case the 3 are as one, that as they reach initiation, they are simulating what happens in the initiation of the whole earth, which is the creative fulfillment of this divine experiment that we know as evolution, the divine creative work. And so level by level by level, there is the healing of these old wounds, and as soon as they're healed, they die. Okay. After that, about this time, Percival and Bors meet in the forest, and they ride to the castle Carbonek. And at Carbonek, they meet, and they're given the spear that was broken by Joseph of Arimathea, or was broken by Peleus, and that broke Peleus himself. And this is a most interesting concept. There's just so many. This is so full of so many things. It's like 10 sets of fireworks going off at the same time that you can't grab at them all. But that's a really interesting principle. This whole, this is my body which is broken for you. that the same instrument that is broken to do the creative work breaks itself. Meaning to say that each of our vehicles, as we use it for its intended use, it breaks it from its nature, but it itself is broken down by it, and through that sacrifice, through that decadence, through that self-destruction is the way it fulfills its purpose. That when we're doing what we're doing, things are supposed to be worn out. They're supposed to outlive their usefulness. But at any rate, Galahad unites the spear in the same way that his ancestor had united the sword, and they have supper. And at the supper are Peleus, his niece, and his nephew, Prince Eleazar. And we have the Grail trio, and at this point, so they sit down to dinner. There are the three: Galahad, Percival, Lancelot, Peleus, his niece and his nephew, and then there are knights. There's 15 altogether. There are 9 others. I put it in that fashion because those are Pythagorean dot triangles. In that particular Pythagorean dot triangle, because I have 5 fingers, is one that I've been making all of my life. Since I've been a little child, I've had a feeling in my bones, as Plato used to say, that touching the 5 fingers, obviously this is the one that is divided into 2, the 3. This represents the tetrad, the divine 10, and when you add the last 5, it turns out to be 15, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels. The 5 level is the soul. 4 level is matter. Oops, that's the wrong way. 4 level is matter. 3 is spirit, in the famous Pythagorean 3, 4, 5 triangle. What I'm trying to point out is that this is the formation in its most resplendent and complete form. It involves body, soul, and spirit. It involves the whole process of involution into matter, evolution of spirit, through the assimilation of soul. Clearly, of the 15, 12 of them are knights, and those 12 surround Peleus, his daughter, and nephew. So you have 12 around a trinity in the center of unity. Okay. At this point, an old man on a bed is brought in by 4 gentlewomen, and he says, "Fulfill the promise and heal me." And at that point, a voice out of nowhere says that the non-Grail people must leave. And at this point, there are only the 12 knights, the 3 from Gaul, the 3 from Ireland, the 3 from Denmark, and the 3 from Britain. Our heroes. And 4 angels descend with a bishop holding a cross set on a chair, and before the chair is a little silver table with the gold. It's quite a beautiful, beautiful picture, if you can imagine it in your consciousness. And in the Grail cup is the inscription here, "See you here." This is political. It's not really completely spiritual. "See you here, Joseph, first bishop of Christendom, the same our Lord secured in the city of Saros, the spiritual place. That is the Holy of Holies, which they call Saros. True to British form, they claim that they want nothing to do with the Romish things, because if you remember, one of the first actions of Arthur when he became king was to overcome Rome and all of those influences and start his own branch of the church. And so they wanted nothing to do with Peter or Paul. And so their first bishop of Christendom is Joseph of Arimathea, who came to them, and they felt they had the Grail. But politics aside, the angels come with candles, and another comes with a towel which is catching blood with a towel, and the spear, another spear, this is a Grail spear, not the spear that they just put together, it's dripping blood into a receptacle. The candles are put on the table, the towel is placed over the Grail, and the spear is set upright at the Grail. And the bishop, who is otherworldly and says so, I'm from the other world, I'm not from this one, he serves Mass, and he serves it to the 12, and he kisses Galahad and his fellows, and then he disappears. And then a bleeding Christ appears, and they eat the bleeding Christ. They don't say that it's physical. This is obviously all quasi-allegoric, meaning to say they have this union of consciousness. The Christ then says, tonight the Grail will leave. You will see it more clearly in Saros. And the king says, take your companions and ride to the ship. And Galahad says to Christ, do I bring all? He says, no, some must stay here. And they get blessed, and then Galahad dips his fingers in the blood, meaning to say that he has then at his disposal the ability to do new creation, because everything that comes from the life spirit creates anew. And so he can then heal, and he heals the king, who is the highest of the levels that they are at, and the king dies a holy man. They board their ship with the implements of the Grail, and Galahad, as he enters the ship, prays for liberation, and a voice says, your prayer is answered. They sleep until they get to Saros, and they arrive at Saros at the same time that Sis's ship comes, and they bring the vessels, and along the way, Galahad's healing cripples and doing things like that. And then a strange thing happens. They're thrown in prison for a year. Meaning that I don't understand it, but it's like there is a period of yet further penance and of not final activity. I could go into it, but I'm not fresh enough to do that. Eventually, the king releases them and blesses, begs their forgiveness, and they give it to him, and he dies. And Galahad is voted to become the new Grail king, and the bishop, that is Joseph of Arimathea, appears at the coronation with the Grail, which is exceedingly clear, which means now their consciousness is fully awake and strong enough to perceive these spiritual qualities. And Galahad is crowned the king, and the first thing that happens when Galahad is crowned king is he dies, and he's taken up into heaven, and then an arm takes the Grail and the spear up into heaven, and Percival, mourning for Galahad, goes to a monastery, and he no longer is a knight, and for 14 months he prays as a monk, and Persephone dies. Meaning to say that I believe that when you reach certain spiritual levels, you rise into new responsibilities. At that point, you have a choice of using them or not. And in this case, they rise to another level to work from that other level of consciousness and no longer appear here. And it's sort of like, it's a death to like earthly experience. At this point, Bors buries Persephone with Galahad and Cis in the Grail Castle, and he returns to Camelot. And when he gets back to Camelot, everybody's overjoyed, and he comes to a special spiritual closeness with Lancelot, and he tells the whole story for Arthur and describes of the Holy Grail, and everything is recorded. And this very simple myth, because the spirit is very pure, very simple. It's almost like childish, the beliefs and the way that things are said there, because this myth is altogether different from all the others that we've had. It's exceedingly spiritual in that it goes right into the spiritual worlds with visions and miracles and actually the stuff of the spiritual worlds. And the more we get away from all of the ramifications and the details and the complexities of the material world and ascend in our consciousness to the realms of what Raymond Rio called pure white magic, the simpler things become until it is all just one love light. And therefore, a myth of a quest that is the quest of the union with the divine within ourself and the completion of the creative task must itself be simple. And the one who most accomplishes it is Galahad, who represents the invincible will, but also represents the most subtle of all forces. And the Grail is accomplished by this great subtlety that doesn't resist evil, it just passes right through it and lives exclusively by my yoke is easy. In fact, some writers on the subject think that the name Galahad means Gilead, meaning Christ himself, which is, I believe, the symbol for us. And this is the most modern of all of the myths that we've looked at, not only in terms of historical time, because some of the fairy tales we've looked at have come much later. It's the most modern in that it dealt with the subtleties of illusion, and it dealt with things not merely as symbols, but it dealt with the illusory nature of symbols, and especially the illusion of the way we interpret them. It's one of the things we didn't go into with Sir Bors, but one of the things that was proven by his simplicity of a fool was that there is the illusion of even interpreting the truth about something, which itself can be as misleading as living in a symbol or something that is apparently a symbol. So we have a very modern myth that leads to our time when all of these myths should be over and done with as myths, but should be lived out in our lives, and it flows right into the spiritual worlds. And the last thing that Bors says are the last words that Galahad says. Remember how ephemeral is this world.